Hello and welcome to Startup Chuck. So I didn't like the audio in the last video, so I finally went ahead and got a decent camera and particularly decent audio, so hopefully those problems are done. Today we're going to be making a sweet helicopter training setup because I've always wanted to learn to fly a helicopter, so I went and took a lesson and realized it was really expensive to just keep flying helicopters and learning while you're with the instructor. So I'm going to try and emphasize doing as much training as I can on a flight simulator. And then when I go do take a lesson, it's going to be a lot more cost effective. So either way, I've been reading through my helicopter training book. And then I went and I already had an old joystick controller here for throttle and whatnot. So this is going to be my collective inputs. Just have this kind of be my lever. And then I went and bought a really cheap off eBay Thrustmaster joystick. And so we're going to extend that guy pretty long and then see if we can't make it feel kind of like it did when I went and took my first lesson. So let's find out. We want to extend this guy, right? So let's try time lapse. Alrighty, I got my test stand set up, a couple of 3D printed brackets and this sweet awesome handle. It's pretty close to the real thing. I got my collective here, got my cyclic. Let's see, yeah, I mean left and right definitely feels the same. Forward and back, I don't know, I'll have to figure that out. But I think I'll give it a test try. One thing I needed was a little more friction, so I tied a t-shirt around this, and it gives me the friction I need in order to keep it in position. $18.5 gigabyte update. How is that even possible? So for anyone doing this at home, in order to make it sensitive enough to where it was similar to the helicopter I was training in, I had to do 75%. So 75% plus or minus on the sensitivity gives it a pretty high level of sensitivity, which seemed pretty accurate to when I was trying to fly the R-22. Alright, so the little bit I move my stick is pretty accurate to how little of the stick is moving in the simulator. Which, if you're trying to set up your simulator, that's a good way to do it. It's basically set it up to where you've got the same amount of stick throw in VR as you do in real life. Flying a helicopter is easy, hovering it's hard. Same with landing. Definitely trying to get better. So after about, 5 or 6 hours of simulator training, finally my brain got used to handling all of just the chaos that's going on in helicopter training versus fixed wing training. So getting the muscle memory down and just not having the stress of checking all the gauges and checking the additional parameters going on made a huge difference. So it was ready for me to go try my second helicopter lesson. My instructor had moved on from the school, so I went and got a new instructor. And so now we get to compare what it was like in the lesson versus what it's like in the simulator. So overall, my takeaway is the simulator is super worth it. With each lesson coming in at about $520, it is definitely nice to reduce the number of hours that you need to repeat because you're just so saturated and overloaded with what's going on in your first few lessons. I mean, you in general want to practice a ton of just engine out scenarios and auto rotations, and you're not going to be doing nearly as much of that as you need to. And so you can practice that all day in the simulator and get the muscle memory down and reaction time down and hone all your skills there. And it translates pretty well into real life. Now there's a few things rather that definitely could be improved in the simulator that aren't real to life. So the forward stick motion in the real helicopter to keep your forward speed, there's a lot of forward pressure needed on the cyclic stick. And even though you can trim that, it was more than I thought. My arm was exhausted after the second lesson, just keeping that stick forward. Definitely something that you have to build up some muscle tone there for. Another thing is there's a tendency for the collective to slowly inch its way upward and change its position. Even if you're lightly holding it, it'll just creep upward. And so that's something that my simulator wasn't going to do in real life. The collective in general, the force on it's very light, so that was pretty realistic. Adding a twist throttle grip wouldn't be too hard to do in the setup I had. I basically would just take one of the lines from any of the other controls there and just put it on a potentiometer and add that twist grip in there. The force on the collective though, the force on the cyclic is just definitely a lot more involved. And if you had force feedback, helicopters shake a lot. When you're holding on to that cyclic, it is all over the map in certain RPM ranges and forward speeds. And so that's going to be hard to control, but just having given my brain, like I said, the 5 to 6 hours of time in order to get the muscle memory and my instrument scan and all of that taken care of, really helped me focus on the lesson versus focusing on being freaked out about flying the helicopter, to the where, like the second lesson, actually, I get very little input from the instructor during regular flight. And then when we go to land, of course, he'd help take over a bit and take off as well. But by the end of the second lesson, I was getting pretty comfortable with being able to essentially hover and then in flight, you know, S turns, maintaining altitude, increasing turns, or I guess increasing altitude turns, decreasing altitude turns. In general, just, you know, coordinated flight was not straining my mental ability, you know, during our lesson. And mentally, in terms of like in VR, in flight simulator versus not in VR in real life, I feel like eventually your brain just kind of ignores the granularity of the VR, you know, scenery, and you forget that you're in there. You think you're, you know, actually flying because you can turn your head and look at your instruments or your surroundings, or, you know, when you go from base to final, you can look at final as you're going to do that. So, for my 2 cents, totally worth setting up a simulator. It is well worth it. And for people who say, you know, I heard they didn't really help a lot. Well, that hasn't been my case. I felt like it helped a ton, especially with my, you know, jump between first lesson and second lesson. And also just, and that's me coming from a GA background where like flying a plane, very comfortable, no problem, whatever. So I thought a helicopter would, you know, translate as easy as GA into a helicopter, maybe with a few more little bits here of like control. But it was actually, like I said, pretty overwhelming on the first lesson, and the second lesson was significantly improved after a bunch of simulator time. So I give it 2 thumbs up for simulator training if you want to save money and overall have a better learning experience while learning to fly a helicopter, whether commercially or for recreation. All right, I hope you liked that video. Please subscribe to Startup Chuck, and I'll see you guys next time.